everybody, thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at this anthology book here called Gouffre. This is put out in a series of anthologies by Lagon Revue. The first one that I got was their most recent one, Plain. Really enjoyed this, and so would have gone back and bought all of them, but they're out of stock. But Gouffre here, apparently they found a few extra copies. They posted that on their Instagram, and I was lucky enough that I responded early enough to get one of it. It was like 6 or 8 that they had found. So very excited to get that. I'm going to show first the binding on Plain. On Plain, because what's so cool about this series is that each artist gets their own paper, they get their own production techniques, they get their own special inks, anything that an artist wants, basically, it seems like they're getting in here. On Plain, they did a smart thing where each artist has their own signature, so a set amount of pages, and then they can fold it and stitch it and bind it that way, so it all holds together. It still feels a little bit, like the binding could rip over time, but this one's really bound together nicely. I don't know if this is a problem for all issues, all books, basically, of Gouffre, but mine immediately fell apart. I mean, as soon as I cracked the first page, I just wound up with a stack of papers here. The back half of the book is bound still, so I guess the glue technique that they used could bind it. I don't know if that's why if I wasn't paying enough attention and they were saying they were getting rid of some bad copies. It came bound, so I don't think they knew it was bad binding. Or if this is a problem for all of the copies of Gouffre, which would be too bad because it's really a lovely production otherwise. But anyways, mine immediately fell apart and turned into a series of single sheets. And you could see what the problem was is, like, they're just binding loose sheets. They're not in signatures that could be sewn in any way or anything like that. But I get it with this because each artist is given their own paper type, their own inks, like all this kind of stuff. You can see here it's on really, really glossy paper with almost a metallic ink on this first story. That's a way to do that, but I'm glad that for newer ones, I don't know how the other ones in the series went because I don't have those, but it seems smart to me that they're saying, okay, everyone has to have a certain length, at least, in their stories, because these stories are all different lengths as well. And so to guarantee that they're keeping paper types, as long as it's an even number, you can just, you don't have to have a signature. They don't have to be in multiples of 4 or whatever. So I get why they did this, but I think obviously the binding and stuff on Plain is much better. But anyways, I still think this is really cool. I think there's a lot of cool stuff going on in here. There's a lot of cool artists. So I want to go through and show you one spread from each artist that talk about the different inks and production techniques and stuff. One thing is this is put out by a company in France. So anytime that there's dialogue, it's in French. But it comes with a little translation book. I think this is a pretty cool thing that's happening now that there's like an international comic scene as people are realizing that they should do like a English language translation, at least, because a number of their customers for these special couture like art books their customers are going to be distributed around the world. So these translation books are pretty cool. They're not my favorite way to read, is to look at what's here and then look down there, but it's better than not having a translation at all. So anyways, with all that in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at all the different artists and their stories. The first piece here is by Sarah Louise Barbette, called From Here Everything Looks Small, and it's just a series of 2 images per spread where you see something from a distance and then you see it up close. So here it's like this dog's butt and nuts are also the entrance to a club. Just silly little transitions like that. The next story here is by Bettina Henney called Fat Flint. This is, you could see, really different production technique compared to the previous one. It looks like a risograph print. It's on matte paper. Very different art style. This one was a little weird in the translation because it seemed like I should be reading it like in the manga reading. So I'm not sure. Maybe this is like an Israeli artist who's, writing as if they're using Hebrew? I don't know, but it's definitely still in French here. It was a strange little thing that didn't carry over into any of the other stories. But really like the art style on this one. Bettina is one of the organizers of this and the person I was communicating with when I purchase this edition of Gouffre. So really enjoyed that, and thank you, Bettina, for finding extra copies and selling them. Olivier Schrouwen has a piece in here. This I recognize from Parallel Lives, but it's cool to see one of Schrouwen's work actually printed in the risograph, which I know his art definitely, you can tell, is prepared for that, prepared for these select colors. I'm used to seeing his stuff in Frantic Graphics reprints, which seem to be done with offset printing, but this with this luminous ink here really looks beautiful. And this was one of my favorite visual sections from that Parallel Lives book anyway, so it's cool to have it here in the risograph. This section here is called Steph, Good Afternoon by Acacia Hortas. And this is, again, you can see a switch in paper. It's really shiny paper. It's got like computer graphics on it. Really like this bit over here on the side where there's some music. I can read drum notation, but not actual notes. So it would be cool to know if someone can actually play this song as well, to know what this song is that's playing out. But really interesting style. This strikes me as someone who probably doesn't normally work in comics, but is adapting their 3D style to it. But I would be definitely more interested in seeing more comics in this set. It's a little weird, but I think it could be used for a good purpose. The next piece is, again, we're switching back to a more matte paper. This just looks like a standard offset print on this one. This is called Thank You, Madam. Enjoy your meal. Have a nice evening. Always happy to serve you. So quite a long title there. It's like an emo band name title. But this is by Tom LeBaron Carriff, and is basically a story about a guy just delivering food, but really nice realistic drawing throughout, really nice zoomed in compositions where things become abstract even though they're realistic. So quite enjoyed that one. This piece here is by Shiwashiwa Anohebi. This one's not so much a comic as it is a series of illustrations. They're just kind of these surreal, poetic illustrations. Again, this one's geared towards being printed in risograph, and you can tell the art is prepared that way. I always like in risograph when people are actually really using the technique of it, so using that diffusion pattern to create the values and layering the color up that way. Really beautiful. I would like to try this at some point, but I just don't have the time or knowledge yet, but really like the way these risograph look. So this one's cool because it's prepared for Riso. This is a piece by Sammy Stein called The Multi-World. It's definitely some kind of parallel universe-y abstract comic. But the cool thing about this is, like a lot of the other pieces on the shiny paper, there's kind of a metallicness to it, especially right here on the lettering. I think with this type of abstract art, or non-representational art, purely formal art, that's the place to start using those trick inks unless they have a narrative purpose. I think some of the stories in these, the artists are just using shit because they can, but artists like Sammy Stein, it really fits with the aesthetic of the book. In this section, JLC produces some really gorgeous, like, they're almost like the drawings you'd get when you're turning a machine in to get not a trademark, what's it called? Anyways, when you're getting a patent on the machine, I've seen some drawings of like old machines for patents before, and they look like this as they describe the mechanics of it. But JLC is using machines that are from like famous novels and stuff. Like here's Franz Kafka, The Penitentiary Colony, and the machine that he describes in there. So really beautiful illustration style, really cool idea. Not necessarily a comic, but a good reason to have like a series of illustrations. And yeah, just really well rendered, really beautiful stuff. And you can see this is on a matte paper. This is by Leon Sadler, Lava Flow's Transformation Machine. Just, yeah, kind of a strange transformation. This is another Riso piece on a matte paper, and you can see this character like wrapping this goop on their head to transform. This story is by Marie Jacoty called Him. This is an interesting little story about a person on the drive and all the signs that they're seeing are reminding them of someone. This one, because of the color pencil art, I actually would have liked to have seen this printed on matte paper, but there are instances where there's this metallic ink being used. This is one of the instances where I think the artist was like, oh, I have metallic ink available to me, I better use it. But there's not any real design or narrative reason to have that. and I think this would have been better on a matte paper just to look like an original piece of color pencil art. So that's one of the things that I think is a downside of this anthology, is sometimes people aren't making the best material decisions, at least in my opinion, for the art and the story at hand. But when people do use these options well, it's really cool. Here's a collection of Tiger Tatishi paintings. This is interesting to me just to see it in another format. If I had not already discovered Tiger Tatishi, this would have blown my mind, but I already have his books, so didn't really need that, but it's cool. And it's just always, anytime I run across his work, it just reminds me of how much I love it. Aiden Koch here, working in a nice matte format. There is a kind of like silvery quality to some of the way these things are printed, but this one has to do a lot with the paper it's on. It is like a light metallic-y ink here too. It's nice to see that metallic ink printed over a matte paper and a paper that's fibrous. It adds a different quality to it that I quite like. But this is a story called Amphibian Treatment Center. Well, most of these stories are, as you can see, pretty short. So even with the translation, like, I don't think any of the stories really stuck. And that was my one criticism of Plane as well, is that the stories weren't so important as the art in these books. And that's fine, especially on a book like this. This is World Tour by Jean-Philippe Breton. Again, a nice shiny one, shiny paper, metallic inks. I think this type of art is where the metallic inks really come into play, because you're working purely formally. You're working just with design and like reflectance as a formal property rather than as some narrative purpose. Not such a comic as it is a series of graphic design posters or illustrations, but really, really cool look. And I guess this can work where I can pull this out as a poster. But you'll see the book's kind of a mess. This is Bray Moreno's The Boy Who Became a Snake. Another instance of the metallic inks on a matte paper. This one looks like a risograph, so kind of seeing the metallic inks with the risograph. What's really cool is it seems like the metallic is going underneath some of the areas too, like the black, so it adds a different quality to those. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it looks like that might be the case. So just, yeah, a bunch of really cool material stuff. Another fun story with like cool art style. This was probably one of my favorite pieces in the whole book by Jason Murphy, called The Character. It's a bunch of, like, this reminds me a lot of Banu Pratap's work, like these really abstract cartooning of characters and emotions. So here it's the person escapes a foe, the character escapes a foe, and you can see as soon as you read it, you know, you can see the character running with like the bunny ears. They have like this hole that they come out of. So a very strange character that's able to animate and express is really cool to me, but it winds up looking like an abstract painting if you don't have the title. And then this is the person sneezes, and you can see them sneezing. So really enjoyed this one. And this one's just simple, one color on a matte paper. It's a nice kind of, this one's really simple. It's just one color, just line work. It's on a nice matte creamy paper, and it shows that even when you're given all of the tricks in the world, you don't necessarily need to use them, you know, if the story doesn't call for it. Here's a horror story by CF called Untitled, but you can see there's this awful creepy character here jumping on someone in a boat. This is one of those ones that like went by too short for me to really remember much about it as a story. Idir Davain produced this, is the artist, I think is how you pronounce the name there. I'm sure I'm ruining it. But another intentionally made for risograph. This is called Hand in Hand, a Walk. And it's just a series of like what someone's seeing while they're on a walk. There's some really beautiful things going on, like with this shadow right here that makes the image look almost like three-dimensional. So just very, very cool. I would never buy a book full of just Riso art like this on its own, but I do really like seeing it used for more than just comics, like seeing it as its own print art form where artists are really familiar with the techniques. They're familiar with the range of colors. I don't know how many colors are in here, but it's a number of colors going into making this. So I'm really into that, and I am glad to have some examples of that kind of stuff. The other piece I was really excited about in this book was the Mythos Chondrites by Sampler Man. Sampler Man's someone who I've run across in a couple of anthologies now and just absolutely love his work. This is another one where the use of the metallic ink, because it's just a formal property, is really cool. Also, Sampler Man's just as a formalist really interesting to me. Like this story here is obviously taking this one shape that's been sampled from a comic, this sample of these blue Ben-Day dots and this metallic ink, and then it's just reforming that one element over and over in a bunch of different ways to create these compositions and this poetics of form. There's not a narrative here, but there are these just transitions in shapes, and that has like a poetic rhythmic quality to it that I quite enjoy. Just formal elements of art being used really well, and this one has that metallic ink printed over the mat. It's a really nice yellowed paper. This is like, whatever this paper is would be awesome to see comics reprinted on this. Like old comics basically take like perfect reproduction of original art and a new coloring and print it on a kind of heavier, maybe slightly grayer than this paper, and I think you could get some really nice looking comics. But even that, like, this is part of the Sampler Man aesthetic, is these old comics, this old comic production. Like the black isn't totally saturated, there's some variation in there, so there's been like some distressing done on the black, and then the choice of paper goes to that as well. It looks like an old yellow comic book. The color, the red's not intense red, it's desaturated. So everything about these are just beautiful, and you know, I have them out like they're basically these little fine art prints now. But you can see just the transitions happening in here, and how clever Sampler Man is in using that one image to get all of these different patterns. I just think it's really cool. I know a lot of people, when they're reading comics, they want like a story, but doing this channel, I've become a big fan of these people who are working in, I don't even want to say abstraction, but non-representation, purely just poetics of form. Really simple piece here by Stephanie Leenhaus called Look. There's just a mark that starts off the story, and then these signs telling someone to look with the mark going over. This feels very much like a Joseph Kosuth conceptual art piece. Like this would be an installation, and then there's a mark on the floor or something. I don't know. It felt like installation art as a comic, which is interesting. I don't think it quite worked, but interesting. Really cool to see Leo Westvind, this piece Transmission. I remember not liking Leo Westvind's art early on, but recently I'm really becoming excited about Leo's work, and I think this piece, Transmission, really puts it over the top for me. Flowform Specimen also was the one that really caught on for me, but seeing this artwork produced this way again, this is like great production. Here's a heavier paper that feels kind of newsprinty. It's not pure white. We have perfect reproduction of the blacks, and then the red, the yellow, and the blue are all in there as spot colors, so it gets this really intense, rich, vivid colors. Looks like a Liechtenstein piece. Anytime you have these colors, the red, the yellow, or the blue, they're totally flat. There's no dots in them, which is really beautiful to look at. And then where there are dots, it's intentional. You know, the Ben-Day pattern has been used intentionally, and they're perfectly reprinted. There's no moire or anything like that. So seeing Leo Westvind's art in this production style, it's like, man, that's what it's supposed to look like. It's like a print. It's a piece of art. So I'm definitely going to be looking out and getting more Leo Westvind stuff, exploring that artist a little bit more, but really excited to see it in this format. Now, at this point in the book, the binding started holding. It was gripping the pages right, but then it became difficult to like open the pages, because I think maybe what happened, just particularly with my copy, is that there wasn't enough glue up front, and then there was too much glue at the back of the book. So now I have pages that I can't even open totally because there's some glue squished in there, keeping them apart. Here you can see the glue, and to take them out like I just did this one will rip the paper a little bit. So a lot of just binding problems with this book, which is unfortunate, and you'll see in some of the later works with the special papers and inks that causes a lot of problems as well. But like I said, With plain, it looks like they're aware of the issues and they've come up with, look, every artist needs to do this many pages so we can put them in signatures and stitch it together. So they've definitely corrected the problems. This story is by Sun Ni. This is called The Sun's Shadow. Really cool, kind of abstracty, diagrammatic work. Really like these little inserts here of like these cells or whatever, bacteria. Also kind of like the look of like someone drawing on top of this with the ballpoint pen. Really cool use of two colors. This piece here is by Hugo Royant and Raphael Orain, called Our Place. Very interesting kind of digital collage style. Another one that, because of the abstraction, the use of like the trick inks and stuff is pretty cool. It really lends to the look. Really shiny paper on this one, really bright white. This is Roxane Lumeret, Mouse Dialogue. This one is kind of interesting. It's very subtle, but I think this page shows it the best, that multiple times throughout the book, not the book, but this series of illustrations here, or this story, it looks like it's just a series of illustrations, but there's always like this moment here where you see the mirror here, and the mirror is supposed to be seen like, we're up off to the right of it, standing up, and then here you see the mirror down from like straight on and lower down, and you can see a dog's tail. I don't know if these are meant to be happening at different times, but my impression reading this story is that there's a bunch of just reveals as you change perspective. Like from over here, you wouldn't see it, but if you got down here, you'd see the dog's tail. So I thought that was really cool, like way to get what looks like and just kind of one-off illustrations. I think if I went back and really, it took me a few to catch on to that, but I do feel like if I went back, there's almost like a murder mystery that would maybe reveal itself. Some of them are just repetitions like this, but then you see the purse has changed where it's at. So there might be some larger story playing out here that I'm not 100% catching on to. Like this window shows up again. So pretty interesting. Again, back to the matte paper. I don't think this is a risograph, but definitely on the matte paper. And yeah, like you can see here as I'm like starting to peel, like that's ripping that page. So that's unfortunate. Really enjoyed this here. Another one of these more abstract pieces. This is Philip Feivel Nessen, back when I was 85, 3 stories, and taking someone else's poems and just translating them. So this one's a poem about Max Ernst, and I really like, as you read through this, how these are being represented in the formal language of comics with like word balloons and stuff like that, but creating these nice little abstractions. I think this is very beautiful, and again, reprinted really, really well, like the matte paper, all of that. The next story, which is done by Alexis Beauclair, is one of the more interesting uses of these trick inks. This is called Interface. It's obviously printed on white paper, and then it's got a black ink and the silver, and I think it might have a gray but not silver ink, or a second silver ink. It looks like it's really hard to tell, and there's no way anyone will see it on camera, but there's all these weird like biomorphic forms here that are having like this sex scene, and it looks like I don't know if it's just how the black is combining with the silver, but it looks like there's the white of the paper, and then like a lighter silver and a darker silver, and then the black. But that might just be how the silver's fading out in the gradient. I don't know, but it makes the thing look really, really three-dimensional. At first, I thought it was silver ink being printed on silver paper, but as you get towards the end of the story, you start getting like these lines here and like this one little peak where this is all, you can see now it's on this really bright white paper, and there's this misting of this really soft gray or silver, and then there's the silver. I think it's, like I said, I think it's a gray with the silver on top of it, and then the black, and it's just getting some really beautiful, like full, rich, round gradient transitions. You can see it here too, like the white, then there's like this grayer area, and then the silver. So really, really, this is an artist, I think, who made full use of the materials available to them with these silver inks. And then here you see it moves from the warm gray to like a cool gray. So there's I don't know if that's just how the black is being mixed over top of the gray, or if there's a cooler gray here, but really beautiful little story and some really cool formal play with the comics medium. This is another one again where it's like, man, if you're gonna work with Trick inks, make it that essential to your story. This story, Undercurrents by Ilan Manouch, is a strange one. It looks like reproductions of graffiti, and then there's a narrative running alongside it in these word balloons. Interesting. It seems kind of like a waste where, you know, we have all of these things that could have been printed 2 or 3 per page. There's some flow to it, but it didn't seem that intentional. Paul van der Eerden, Bad Breath, someone else using this like glossy paper to kind of a poetic effect. Really enjoy the compositions here. Not a comic so much as it is just like illustration and graphic design type of approach to things, but really cool. Really love it. Really especially love the coloration of the lines here. It's just there's so many visual strategies that are coming over from graphic design into comics these days. I think that's a really, really good thing, and I'm excited to see more artists like this bridge the gap between the two, figure out ways to really pile up meaning using these techniques. Another really interesting piece here, this is Luisa Gagliardi, Don't Shoot At. It's basically a walkthrough of a first-person shooter game printed. It looks like a risograph print, but this could be offset printing. I'm not sure. It feels like a risograph, but just really cool visuals of someone going through, you know, a first-person shooter game, but using that as an excuse to have all of these kind of cool, just, again, like geometric abstractions all over the place. There's a Simon Hanselman piece in here, kind of like a sci-fi story. This one was a bit hard for me to read. I'm not the biggest fan of Simon Hanselman's work anyways. I think it looks cool. This story I enjoyed more than the average, typical Simon Hanselman stoner story, little sci-fi story, but especially because this has a lot of text in it, was a little bit harder to consume using the translation sheet. And here you can see where the glue now to even open the pages is starting to rip them. This one's on a nice matte paper. I think it's kind of this gray paper I'm talking about that would be really cool for reprints. Felix D. Combat, The Cock. Not sure what the title had to do with this one, but it looks like a pigeon up here, and a riot, another cool one. This is surprising to me because it's done with the risograph like pattern, the little stochastic pattern rather than the half toning, but it's printed, it looks like offset because it's on the shiny paper. I'm not sure if you can run shiny paper through a risograph or not. I don't think so because it's a soy-based ink. But it looks like that diffusion dither pattern that you would get for the risograph. So an interesting look. Joe Kessler's One Heavenly Ride. Joe Kessler is someone, Sean and I really need to talk about it. I think we both have the Window Pane book and really enjoy it. Joe Kessler is somebody who really plays with production already in his own work. And here you can see the typical Joe Kessler thing, which is to have red, blue, yellow, and then a dark green rather than cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And the color combinations you get from this are totally wild. The other thing that I really love about Joe Kessler's work is he's exploring every which way you can combine these things. Like in certain places, like here, the red line is, well, for the most part trapped, like the orange and stuff doesn't go under it. But in certain places, the line work will be trapped so that it doesn't mix with the color underneath it. And in other instances, it won't be trapped, so you'll get like the transparent colors printing over top of each other. Some really cool things like this, where it's like a solid red gradating out over a solid yellow. Just someone who's really, really aware of color mixing for offset lithography. I think this one's offset. I don't think it's Riso, but I could be wrong. And here you could see all the colors pulled out kind of separately, the red, the yellow, and the blue. The green has a bunch of stuff mixed over top of it. The green actually might even just be a mixture of the yellow and the blue, actually, now that I'm looking at it closer. So I'm not sure. But I really like Joe Kessler's work, and yeah, we need to talk about Window Pane because it's a masterclass in exactly using this approach. This story, Untitled by Jiro Ishikawa, really strange. Don't know what it's about. Definitely pornographic in some areas, but again, really cool mix up of just like graphic design and illustration concerns with paneling and comics. I'm not sure that it tells a story. And then just printing it in red like revs it up and makes it look really interesting. So this is an artist I definitely want to follow up on. And then the book ends with Maren Carlson's piece here, another one that's on the shiny paper and uses that kind of silver. I think there's some really interesting distortions of form going on here as this little wizard guy does his magic and like sucks the world into this orb or whatever. So that's it for the stories in here. You can see the covers like this really beautiful shiny production with these like kind of sparkly inks on them underneath like a laminated cover. Really beautiful, again, just kind of poetics of form type of comics. So all kinds of cool stuff to enjoy in this, but unfortunately the just binding on it's a total mess. And you know, as far as I know, there's no more of these available because they were out of print and then they just found a few. So I'm sorry you won't be able to go get it, but I'll share a bit of what it is and say, hey, look, you know, like Lagon Revue puts out some awesome books like this. Every time they do one, it's like this. Plain is like this with all these different paper types, all these different inks, the custom screen print stuff, the translation sheet. You know, these books are really cool. So you won't be able to get the ones that have been made, I don't think, but definitely keep an eye on Lagon Revue as someone that you should be getting anything else that they put out.
Make sure to like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell.